Welcome to Autism Parenting Summit, brought to you by our sponsors. Platinum sponsors. Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics Incorporated. Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics is developing microbiota transplant therapy for treating gastrointestinal symptoms and autism symptoms. Hardy Nutritionals. For over 20 years, Hardy Nutritionals has helped people improve mental wellness naturally. Their research-backed micronutrient formulas are trusted by healthcare professionals worldwide to support mood, focus, and emotional resilience without the side effects of traditional treatments. Autism Treatment Center of America. At the Autism Treatment Center of America, we believe every child with autism has unlimited potential. Through our Sunrise program, we guide and empower families to connect, communicate, and inspire growth, transforming lives one joyful moment at a time. Innate Healthcare Institute. At Innate Healthcare Institute, we imagine a future where children with autism have access to the most advanced healing therapies available. Based in Scottsdale, Arizona, our clinic combines regenerative and integrative medicine to help unlock each child's fullest potential. North Florida Stem Cells. North Florida Stem Cells, led by Dr. Eric Weiss, is dedicated to providing innovative stem cell therapy for children with autism, helping families explore new possibilities for improved quality of life. Gold sponsors. Autism Parenting Magazine. Join a thriving community of families and unlock the potential of your child. Autism Learning Network. Join a community that understands. Unlock a wealth of resources. Access expert advice, practical tools, and shared wisdom.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Autism Parenting Summit. This session is called Listening to Autistic Voices, Insights on Mental Health with Dr. Stephen Shaw, a professor, author, and lifelong advocate for autistic individuals. Stephen's story is inspiring. As a child, he was non-speaking until age 4 and was once recommended to be placed in full-time care. But with the support of his family and educators, he went on to become a leading voice in autism research and education. In this session, Stephen shares findings from a powerful research project focused on mental health, one that prioritizes autistic voices in shaping the questions, the process, and the solutions. It's all about what happens when we truly listen, collaborate, and value lived experience. Whether you're a parent, educator, or ally, this session offers an important perspective on supporting autistic people in ways that are respectful, inclusive, and impactful. Welcome, Stephen. We look forward to your presentation. Let's begin.
Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be presenting for you Autism Parenting Summit, and we'll be talking about listening to autistic voices in participatory research and prioritizing mental health. This presentation will focus on research that I've done and also some research that I'm continuing to do, where we're engaging in involving the community, the autistic community, in our research. So let us begin. And with funding and acknowledgements, the research that I'm talking about, past and present, are funded by Patient Care Outcomes Research Institute, otherwise known as PCORI. And the goal is to meaningfully include and engage autistic stakeholders in identifying priorities and methods to support patient-centered outcomes research in collaboration with autistic people. Dr. Teal Benavides is my partner in crime in all of this research, and we have no financial conflicts of interest with the entities who paid for the study described herein. So first, let's talk a little bit about what brings me here to talk about autism and specifically research to you. Taking it from the very beginning, things were pretty typical. At 24 hours of age, my wife says I looked like an egg. And then at 18 months, what I call the regressive autism bomb exploded. And like with 30% of us on the spectrum, I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and in brief, became a very autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism in those days that it took my parents a year to find a place for diagnosis. And when they did, the doctor said, well, this kid's too sick, send him off to an institution. Fortunately, my parents, like we see ever increasing numbers of parents who participate in conferences like this from around the world, they advocated on my behalf and they convinced the schools to take me in about a year. And it was during that year my parents implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program, emphasizing music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation. So if we think about what my parents did, an important breakthrough, and this relates to participatory research, is that when their attempts to get me to imitate them failed, they flipped it around and imitated me. They reached out to me, and I became aware of them in my environment, and then they were able to move me along. And similarly with participatory research, the goal is to reach out to connect with, build that initial connection like my parents did in imitating me, and then developing a trusting relationship. That's a big piece of participatory research, is that you build a sense of trust and bonding with the community you are researching into. So by age 4, with what my parents did, speech began to return. At age 4, I entered the school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. Instead of being considered as psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to neurotic. So things were moving up in the world. We often hear about the strengths and interests of autistic individuals. I was found by my parents at age 4 taking apart a watch with a sharp knife. I'd pop open the back, extract the motor, remove the gears, spin them around, and then put it all back together again. And the watch still worked, and there weren't any pieces left over. So, as we so often see in autism, I had amazing fine motor control to take apart a watch, but then it's always curious as to where that fine motor control went when it came to penmanship. Like so many of us, I was a penmanship disaster area in grade school. One of the worst things I could experience, other than bullying, would be to walk into a room with a paragraph on the board, because that meant we were going to have to copy it down. And by the end of the period, I'd gotten through a few words, and everybody else had gone to recess. So my parents, upon noticing this curious ability, they soon provided all kinds of other devices to take apart and put together. So I had great ability to put things together, fine motor control, and had great difficulty in writing, also fine motor control. And what this is an example of is the often sharp lines of demarcation that we see between the abilities and the disabilities that come with autism. So as we move along, at age 6, I entered regular school kindergarten. That was a social and academic catastrophe. You know what happens to people who are different in grade school. Fortunately, school systems beginning to realize that bullying is not a developmental phase that people need to go through, and something needs to be done about it. Academically, I was about a grade behind in most of my subjects. And I would spend most of my time going to the library, getting all the books on my favorite subjects, reading them, taking notes, copying diagrams, and then putting them back and getting books on something else. So what were some of these interests? They range from music to aviation to space exploration, dinosaurs, earthquakes, electricity, mechanics. And sometimes I'd even wonder if there was more to school than just reading my favorite books, like doing math in groups. I think what it translated to is that teachers didn't quite know how to reach me, but at the same time, it wasn't a behavior problem, so they just left me to my own devices. And in those days, it was probably for better rather than for worse. So moving along, I remember in third grade, I had a stack of astronomy books on my desk, busy doing my thing, taking notes, copying diagrams, and a teacher told me that I'd never learn how to do math. But somehow I figured out just enough math to teach statistics at the university level. The good news is that these days, increasing numbers of educators are strength-based and would find a way to teach math through astronomy. I started becoming interested in bicycles, and I got it to a point where I could take a bicycle apart down to the ball bearings and get that back together again. Middle and high school, you don't need to be autistic to have difficulties in middle and high school. For me, it was actually easier for two important reasons. One is that I figured out that using words instead of sound effects from the environment really helped with social interaction. And two, I was able to engage in my focused interest in music. I joined the band. And now I had a structured activity in which to mediate my interactions with others. And I became so fascinated with music that I got it into my head I needed to learn how to play all the musical instruments. And there I was in the instrument closet, exploring all the different instruments, taking them apart, sometimes combining several instruments into these horrific contraptions that never should have seen the light of day. And while I didn't learn all the instruments, I did get it up to about 15. And then when I heard the requirement for a degree in music education was that you had to learn all the musical instruments, well, that just seemed to be the thing to do, and that's exactly what I did. So as a music major, studying music for my bachelor's, master's, and all of my doctoral coursework, and then I started getting interested in special education and autism. So I defected to the School of Education and got my doctorate in special education with a focus in autism. University is where people often meet their significant others. That is where I met my wife. We have the common interest of music. She comes from the People's Republic of China and was the principal harpist of the Beijing Symphony for 9 years before coming to the United States. If you want to find out more about my experiences as an autistic person and also my wife's contributions, I encourage you to read my autobiography, Beyond the Wall. So as we continue looking at autism, as we think about research into autism, it begins with awareness. And we've been at awareness of autism for several generations. And we've come from considering autism as a rare psychiatric condition caused by poor parenting. Mostly the mother was blamed, with a prevalence rate of 1 in 10,000. Whereas now, the CDC recognizes autism having a prevalence rate of 1 in 31. That's a lot of autism. And what I tell educators is that if you don't have an autistic child in this class, the numbers will catch up with you and you'll have one in the next. And we're so much better as a society at recognizing autism at home, in education, in the community, in employment, and increasing numbers of autistic individuals learning about autism, perhaps on the internet, doing a informal self-diagnosis and then getting that validated by more formal means. And that builds a solid foundation for acceptance. And that is when we turn away from trying to make the autistic person more like a non-autistic person and accepting those autistic characteristics and working with as opposed to against. And that is one of the pillars of participatory research, is that one, recognizing that the autism community exists. So we have things to study, we have things to research. That's the awareness piece. And then acceptance, we're going to work with autistic people because autistic people can help us define what is important, what are the priorities according to autistic individuals. And then we move on to the third step, which is appreciation. And appreciation is where autistic people are valued for who we are and what we contribute to society. And as we consider participatory research, we value autistic partners in being involved in all aspects of research, according to their interests, according to their abilities. And then that fourth step is action. And action is all the work and the efforts that we're going to look at, as we move through this presentation on how we can engender authentic and meaningful engagement of the autistic community in our research. So my question to you, whether you're a parent, whether you're a researcher, however you're involved in the autism community, what actions are you going to take to climb these stairs of awareness, acceptance, and appreciation of autistic people in your lives? What are you going to do to involve autistic people in key decisions as we consider what I call the 4 A's of autism? So on that note, let's move on to what is participatory research. And as we look at participatory research, we look at Dr. Christina Nicolaitis, who has a really good explanation as to what participatory research is. We're going to watch this video and answer some questions as to, well, what is participatory research? What implications does authentic engagement of autistic people have for the reliability and validity of autism research? What are some key factors indicating that successful participatory research exists? And how can we use participatory research in determining health priorities for autistic individuals? So let's take a look at this excerpt from Dr. Christina Nicolaitis' presentation.
I don't want to get into the nuances of the difference of each type. But before we even start, I want to talk about, like, what does the big umbrella term of participatory research mean? And when it comes down to it, despite all the little nuances of the different approaches, really, we're talking about including non-academic community members on the research team. It doesn't mean that I asked a bunch of people what they thought we should study, or I did a focus group with people, or I did qualitative research with people. Those are all wonderful things to do, but we're not talking about getting ideas and information from study participants. We're talking about bringing people from the population we are studying onto the research team as our collaborators. That is the crux of participatory research. It can look very different ways. Again, there's many different types. I like thinking of 3 big buckets under this big umbrella term. One bucket that I tend to use the most often is where we really strive for equal power sharing. Now, this is an aspirational goal, and I can't tell you that we are always successful, but the idea is that we are aiming for true equal power sharing. That is what we try to do with community-based participatory research, and that is what some versions of participatory action research really try to do. There are many other buckets. Another big bucket that I think of is what I consider sort of authentic inclusion. That is, for example, many projects that use patient-centered outcomes research's approach of patient and stakeholder engagement tend to do that. Some of the co-production models that we see in the United Kingdom do that. The idea here is that we're authentically including people in a rigorous way throughout all of the research. And then there's consultation type models where we're not really aiming to share power. We're not really aiming to have people make any decisions. We're getting their advice. You'll hear a lot of people having a community advisory board, or they get a Delphi panel or something like that, where we're getting advice, but we're doing what we want with the advice. Again, my preference is often around CBPR, but really only if in fact that's what you're really doing. So this was a figure that back when I first met Dora, she was at the time a community partner, not even a community partner, she was an autistic self-advocate. For people who know Dora, she's crossed over to the dark side and now has her PhD and is a NIH-funded autism researcher. But back then, I capitalized on one of her wonderful strengths was that I do info dumps. I babble and babble and babble, and she helps come up with a nice, clear, organized way of representing what we were saying. So one of the first things we did is we put together this diagram that really kind of talks about what we mean when we say community-based participatory research. Basically, community members overall, not at any particular time, but overall, the community keeps research respectful, accessible, and socially relevant. At the same time, academics keep research scientifically sound and academically relevant. At any point, we're working together. It's not like you do this and I do this. We actually work together. And while we're figuring out what we want to do, again, community partners are responsible for making sure that the research meets community priorities and is relevant to the community. At the same time, where somebody like me makes sure that it actually has scientific value and it meets funders' priorities, and so forth during the implementation of the research, during the dissemination of the research. And this cycle continues from one project to the next to the next. Now, an individual person may actually have dual roles, may flit back and forth. As I mentioned, Dora started off as my lead community partner. She is now my closest academic partner. I have primarily been involved in this as an academic, but I sometimes bring my lived experience, both as a parent and as a neurodivergent person due to my ADHD. And each of these things are, again, we can flit back and forth, but in general, we try to do these things. We don't try to teach community partners how to do statistical analyses any more than they try to teach me what it's like, to live as an autistic person. But we work together. That all being said, not all participatory research is or should be CBPR. The point is to match the context and the goals of the research. And most important, to be transparent about what you're doing and what people are getting into. What we don't want is for researchers to pretend to be doing something they're not, in the same way that, we don't want community partners to think that they're getting involved as equal partners when really they're just advisors, or to think they're just advising when in fact you're actually expecting them to be making regular ongoing commitment. It's also really important not to tokenize people. And I know nobody intends to do that. And everyone starts, or most everyone, I would think, starts with really good intentions, but it's really easy to accidentally tokenize people. So again, we'll talk a little bit about theory today, but there's a lot of active work that has to happen to match the theory to the practice.
So that provides a good introduction to participatory research. And the question behind it all is, how can you meaningfully and authentically engage autistic individuals in your efforts to support autistic people? And this question can be generalized to whatever population that you happen to be studying. So the question is, why do we need to bother to ensure that autistic individuals are involved in research? And we know that there are many co-occurring conditions that occur with autistic individuals, uh, mental health conditions, physical health conditions, and there's a higher rate as compared to those who are not on the autism spectrum. So we do know a bit about health and healthcare needs of autistic adults, and not much is being spent on that, although it is increasing. You also might note that I'm using identity first language because most adults on the spectrum seem to prefer identity first, or in other words, we identify with being autistic, just as like citizens of the United States identify with being uh, Americans, perhaps more accurately, United States of Americans, but nobody says it that way. We don't hear about people with Americanism. So that is, so you'll be hearing identity first language. So how did it get started? Several years ago, I had just finished speaking on a panel focused on autistic intelligence. And afterwards, I was accosted by Teal Benavides, who is an OT. It always takes an OT with these things and developing new and innovative strategies and research and whatnot. And she talked about studying healthcare issues facing autistic individuals. And as someone who is focused on matching strategies and approaches such as Miller method, ABA, floor time, teach, daily life therapy, and so on, why should I be interested in medical issues? So we kept talking, and she talked about studying the question, what is the most challenging healthcare issue facing autistic individuals? Well, that's something interesting. And rather than asking doctors, therapists, educators, and others in allied fields, we should directly ask autistic individuals. Well, that seemed to be a good thing to do too. And in addition to that, we should involve autistic individuals in uh, in our research uh, through participatory research, meaningful engagement. So that led to the writing up a proposal and it being accepted by Patient Care Outcome Research Institute, where we were paid $250,000 over 2 years to ask this very question. So the first thing we did is we established a team leads, I should say, who half autistic and half non-autistic. And we did this just to show that autistic people can be inclusive and can include people who are not autistic as well. We then established a paid community council of autistic adults, and that was one of the pillars that Dr. Nicolaitis mentioned in the video earlier. A paid community council of autistic adults and other stakeholders, was mostly autistic adults, to help inform our research and to guide what we are looking for. So we move along and we look at, as we're looking at the why, we've looked at the why, and we're looking at the how at this point. And what we, our project, and it was called a project, it's very much like a grant from Patient Care Outcome Research Institute. And the reason why it's called a project is because it serves dual roles. One is to ask a question, which, as I mentioned before, what is the most challenging healthcare issue facing autistic individuals? And the second part is studying engagement itself, studying engagement. So for the studying engagement component, we put together an engagement and compensation guide for researchers where we identified the 4 C's of authentic engagement: presuming competence, making sure there's open communication, making sure that autistic people are paid for their time, and we'll take a look at considerations. This is a free publication. It's available on the PCORI website, as you see in the link below. So as we look at these 4 C's individually, the first being competence. The first is that we presume competence. We assume that people who, for example, don't speak do understand all verbal language. And that is why we're seeing an increased usage of the term non-speaking versus nonverbal, because nonverbal suggests that the individual doesn't understand language. And there are so many autistic people, you may very well know some, who don't speak, but they let their wants and needs be known, even before they get to using an assistive communication device. Now, that said, I have a number of autistic friends who don't speak, but communicate through typing. And I've spent hours with some of these people typing, texting with them. And the only reason I know they don't speak is because they told me, or I met them somewhere, or perhaps I read it. So what we know is that there's the same range of intelligence in non-speaking individuals that we see in the speaking population. We also turn away from a deficit model, and part of that's presuming competence, and also another part is modifying our language. So we talk about differences. So when we talk about ASD, we talk about autism spectrum differences. And the focus is on how these differences impact function rather than it being a problem with the individual. Now, that is not to deny the fact that there are many, many challenges facing autistic individuals. That's why we're doing research, but we also have to recommend the abilities and the strengths. We also teach students, family members, and others to communicate with. So that's back to that second A of autism, awareness, and then onto acceptance. We work with the autistic person. And we also assume that since the person, even if they're non-speaking, they still understand what is being discussed. And you can imagine going into a meeting and the autistic person is brought in, and the whole meeting focuses on what the person cannot do, such as in an IEP meeting. And what effect would that have on that person's mental health? So speaking of competence, here's another video. This is of Paul Kotler. Paul Kotler is a non-speaking person. And as you watch this video, consider whether Paul has communication. Is he aware of his environment? Does he have agency? Does he have wants for the future? Does he have a voice?
I like to do anything that allows me to have a clear mind and calm body. Ice skating, exercise, yoga. When I skate, I feel calm and safe. More fluid movement is possible. I'm high on having control, and it's freeing for me.
My name is Melinda Kotler. What's your name?
Kyle.
Gonna try to have a...
It's gonna be.
How's it going? So how are you feeling today? This is a big day.
Ready?
It has taken me a long time to accept myself. Some people lack understanding that speaking equates to intelligence. I need people to greatly understand that autism hampers communication.
Just a lot.
I'm able to communicate all I could speak through typing. I want people to know that I'm looking for knowing a life filled seeming like everyone else. Friends, listening to music, a job, life like others have. I could absorb things but couldn't show it. When I learned to type, I could finally prove my thinking nature.
Ice skating.
It was important that others knew I was a thinking, caring person greater than
Tools would be my own voice instead of a synthetic one.
I like to do anything that allows me to have a clear mind and calm body. Ice skating. Exercise. Yoga. When I skate, I feel calm and safe. More fluid movement is possible. I'm high on having control and it's freeing for me.
My name is Melinda Kotler. What's your name?
Fine.
Gonna try and have a.
How's
How's it going? So how are you feeling today? This is a big day.
It has taken me a long time to accept myself. Some people lack understanding that speaking equates to intelligence. I need people to greatly understand that autism hampers communication. I'm able to communicate all I could speak through typing. I want people to know that I'm looking for knowing a life filled seeming like everyone else. Friends, listening to music, a job, life like others have. I could absorb things but couldn't show it. When I learned to type, I could finally prove my thinking nature.
Ice skating.
It was important that others knew I was a thinking, caring person greater than my outward behaviors.
Perseverance is the ability to keep working at something even as your whole body screams to go the other way. Some helpful tools would be my own voice instead of a synthetic one. Word prediction, option to speak words or sentences, the ability to save documents with easy retrieval, a visual on the device that would allow me to see when my anxiety is increasing. People lack insight, making having autism a life sentence in prison. I bear responsibility for getting most people to see that people with autism are like each normal person inside.
AT&T in the Ability Lab of New York University in.
So as we see, Paul does communicate. He's someone who you could communicate with. His receptive language is perfectly fine. You can talk to him, but he won't speak back through verbal communication. I've met Paul a number of times. We've co-presented at conferences, and he will say my name, and he sounds like the way he sounded when he said his own name, but those are all the words that I'll get out of him that come out of his mouth. The rest of it's all typed. It's much more difficult for him to speak than it is for most people. He does have awareness of the environment, hyper awareness, if anything. He knows what he wants, and he has a voice. And Paul is just an example of an autistic person who is just not neurologically set up to speak. So as we continue looking at communication, and you might notice a subheader, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. And the reason why I have that there is, like with so many things, the strategies we develop for autistic individuals tend to be helpful for everybody else. And if you take a look at this email sample from our engagement guide that we still use, you can see how easy it is to read. You get what you want from it. You're not met with a wall of text that you're trying to extract meaning from. And you also have a good idea of what you're supposed to do, or whether it's just for information only. And emails in this format are helpful to everybody, in addition to being helpful for autistic individuals. And we've got the compensation piece. Just like everybody else, autistic people need to be compensated for their contributions. So often I've seen at conferences where an autistic person may be given a keynote slot, but they may not be paid as the others are paid or not supported. And especially with a population of people who are chronically under and unemployed, the National Autistic Society estimates that the combined under and unemployment rate of autistic people is 88%. So we can flip that around and recognize that only 12% of autistic people are employed to our capacity. And that makes things especially challenging. We would think nothing of attending a meeting. Say we had to pay $15 for a train ride into the city to go to a meeting. If you're under or unemployed, even that $15 becomes a financial barrier. So it makes it all the more important to make sure that autistic people are paid. We started out at $50 an hour for our community council members, and we've been able to increase that to $100 an hour. The challenge we do face is that payments can interfere with disability benefits, and we have to take a look at how to best compensate individuals. Sometimes we've used gift cards, such as Amazon or wherever that person would likely be shopping and would be able to spend that money meaningfully. But unfortunately, not many organizations are set up to provide gift cards for compensation as compared to regular payment, usually electronically. And then we have considerations. And our considerations are that we need to build trust, respect, and support. It takes a long time. It's taken us years to build a sense of trust between our community council, who advise us on our research, and the researchers to trust the community council. There's been a history of mistrust between researchers and autistic individuals. Fortunately, we're now able to trust each other, and we prioritize that in our meetings. And as we consider with our considerations, as we continue, we make sure that autistic people are included in all aspects of the research. Proper accommodations. Some of us may communicate through spoken word. Others communicate through typing. Others communicate in real time, and others may need more time to think about it and perhaps review the video of the meeting that we took, the recording, and they'll take more time, but we'll still have meaningful input. We focus on what the person can do, the abilities. And as we heard in the video from Dr. Nicolaitis, we value autistic people as an integral part of the team and make sure that we avoid tokenism. And when we get to dissemination, presenting in several modalities. So commonly we think of presenting research in a research journal, which is accessible to academic geeks like me, like Christina, like many others, but most people are not academic geeks. And we need to make sure that research is presented in a way that's understandable for everybody else. We've seen an increase of what is known as plain language descriptions of research, and it sounds like what it is. It's easier to read. And we also use infographics to present the information in primarily a visual form. We discussed compensation and consulting autistic people for what our priorities are, or what research priorities should be. So as we look at our priority settings, the methods, how did we get our information? And we got our information over the 2 years with a couple of large group meetings, online surveys, face-to-face focus groups to talk about what is the most challenging healthcare issue facing autistic individuals. This research was United States centric. We did have some people from the United Kingdom, perhaps other areas of Europe, and also Australia. So it's also important to recognize, as we also think about limitations of our research, we're looking at mostly the Western world for our information. And that needs to be kept in mind when we get to the results. So what are those results of the research? We found that what was most on the minds of autistic individuals was access to mental health interventions. So mental health, that's what's most on the mind. And whereas many people might have thought it could be obesity or physical fitness or sleep, and those are challenges too, mental health is what bubbled to the top. And what that suggests is that we need to make sure that there is access to healthcare and provide those needed accommodations to get that care. And accommodation a possible accommodation might be having visual representations of the routines that happen in a medical office, perhaps even having a quiet room in addition to the standard waiting room, and also gender inequalities in diagnoses, treatment, and sexual well-being. So, for example, we know that the conventional wisdom of autistic diagnoses being 4-to-1 in favor of males. So for every 4 autistic people, we have 1 female autistic diagnosis. And what we know, people who are close to the autism community realize that the prevalence rate is many more. One way to put it is that so many females are not diagnosed. We're missing those diagnoses. So if we look at some of the research, the publications from this research, we then dug in a little bit deeper into what those mental health priority and topics were, such as trauma. Trauma has a big effect on autistic people. Many autistic people are traumatized in one way or another. Isolation, what does that impact? And as we think about mental health challenges for autistic individuals, often people think it's just something that goes side by side. It's considered comorbid. If you're autistic, you're likely to have mental health issues just running side by side. Maybe it has to do with the biology of autistic people. However, what I and increasing numbers of people are questioning is whether the mental health challenges that autistic people face may perhaps be secondary. And what I mean by that is that if we look especially at point 2, how would mental health prevalence compare between autistic and non-autistic people if non-autistic people had to deal with or be subjected to the same marginalization that autistic people face, difficulties in success in education, meeting significant others, employment, involvement in the community. And if typical people had those same challenges, then what would the rate be of mental health challenges facing non-autistic individuals? This isn't an experiment that we can ethically conduct, but it is interesting to think about. So as we consider looking at those health priorities, we see the quality of life was very important. We know that autistic people tend to be more anxious than most others. We also know that the social and the world in general tends to be much less predictable for autistic individuals than non-autistic individuals. And it can be anxiety producing if you are not able to predict what is coming next. And as we go down the line, we see that there's a number of challenges, many of which are familiar to autistic people who are listening to this, parents and others who are familiar with autistic individuals. So we talked about mental health. We also measured or asked questions about physical health and what outcomes are important. What does it mean to be healthy? What do health professionals need to know? What would you like to see as breaking news, CNN breaking news headline about autism research that you would like to read? So in doing that, these are some of the challenges that autistic people would like to see addressed. Similar or familiar things here, ranging from pain and migraines and digestive challenges, dyspraxia, and so on. They matter to autistic individuals. Sleep is pretty far up there as well. We know that many autistic people have challenges with getting regular sleep. So we continue looking at what being healthy means. According to us autistic people, the absence of chronic illnesses and challenges, accessing resources, some which cost money that autistic people don't have or may just not be physically able to get to. And as we consider what so many people take for granted that are not available for autistic individuals, it becomes easier to understand why mental health was considered as a top priority. Which health professionals would we like to see involved in future research? And as you see here, primary care providers, counselors, psychologists, and dental professionals. How many of you know autistic people who have difficulties going to the dentist? And how can we access? You don't need to be autistic to have difficulty with accessing medical care. And to this end, I think of a person I know who had spent her entire life as a social worker helping autistic and other individuals with disabilities navigate the medical system. That is what she did. She also has a son who's autistic, so she has experience helping him navigate for his medical needs. Well, she had a medium-sized medical procedure that she needed to have done, and she was about 70 years old, so you might say at the peak of her knowledge and experience in navigating medical systems. It was all she could do, and she could barely manage her own medical case, which shouldn't have been that complicated. And if we take someone with a master's degree in social work, who has extensive experience in this area, who also has challenges, it suggests that we've got some work to do in this area of access. What would us autistic people change? And as we look at communication between patient and provider, again, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I know many autistic people who have the same feelings. We need better communication between patient and provider. Presumption of competence. Many medical professionals, due to ignorance, not due to malice, but due to ignorance, often treat autistic people like little kids. They talk to us louder and more slowly, as if we weren't capable of understanding what they were talking about. The environment of care. Waiting rooms tend to be not noisy. They tend to be what I call a basket full of sensory violations. Can we provide another space for these individuals? Or perhaps have a sign like my doctor does, and he doesn't focus on autism, my primary care physician. But in his office, there's a sign that essentially says no perfume and no cell phones. I guess they don't mind if you text or you read while you're waiting on your cell phone, but certainly it speaks to not having cell phone conversations in a small waiting room. And then accessing. And if we can improve access for autistic individuals, it's going to go a long way to improving access for everybody else as well. Gender and sexual health, getting back to increasing accuracy of autism diagnoses in females. I know many females on the spectrum who are not diagnosed until middle age. And until they get properly diagnosed, they tend to have a whole alphabet soup of misdiagnoses ranging from various types of depression, oppositional defiance disorder, and various other things that just don't make sense. And they're being treated for the wrong condition. That's not too, it's also important to realize that some of these conditions are also co-occurring with autism, so we need to be aware of that as well. Aging in autism. We're learning more and more about supporting autistic individuals who are adults. Autistic children become autistic adults, and autistic adults become autistic seniors. So we can think of autistic seniors. That's, you might say, the next great frontier. Senior citizenship and autism. And sexual abuse. People with disabilities have a higher rate of sexual abuse. Autistic people have one of the highest rates of abuse amongst people with disabilities. So that's something that's a priority we need to address as well. And some questions that the respondents, be it our in-person meetings, the conferences, the large group meetings, that is, the surveys or the focus groups, these are questions that people have, autistic people have, that would be helpful to get answered to improve the health of autistic individuals. And focusing on females and non-binary individuals. These are some headlines that they would like to see, and which are probably true once we get better at recognizing autism in females. And it may even be a one-to-one, because we know that autism expresses itself differently in the female population than it does in the male population. We also have cultural bias as well. And what I mean by that is, if we can contrast how we think about an autistic female, maybe an elementary school girl who's quiet, doesn't speak much, doesn't really talk or look at any other people. What do we say? Oh, we say she's shy and we get on with our day. If we take it a few decades later, the autistic woman who doesn't interact with many others, who is keeping to herself. Maybe she carries her knitting around with her, which is a common self-regulatory activity that I see a number of autistic females engaging in. What do we say? Oh, she's shy. Now, we ask the same question about the boy who is not interacting with others in grade school or as an adult. We might say he's shy, but it's certainly going to get a lot more notice. Doesn't mean that the male is autistic, but people are definitely going to take notice and attempt to work with it. So if we summarize the health concerns, the physical health concerns, these are the big four. And if we look at priority topics, there is a link to mental health as compared to physical health, or access, gender, and sexual health. So as we consider our research, I feel we've had some great important findings that other researchers are working with and taking them to further heights. However, it's also important to recognize the limitations of our priority setting activities. And that is, where did we get our sample? We got it from self-selected adults who have the capacity and the wherewithal to, one, see that we're there, and then two, to interact with us. And mostly it was, in the research world, we call it a snowball sample. And what that means is I know a few people who would be interested in being involved in our research and answering these questions. And those two people know a few other people who would be interested, and it just goes like that. So it was a convenience sample. We also have to address the issue of self-diagnoses aren't confirmable. So somebody could answer on the survey and we don't know. We didn't have verification, say a doctor's report that they were autistic. It was limited to those of us who had internet access and could participate in online settings, the survey, or attending a focus group, or being able to afford to come to a large group meeting. Another one that we don't have in there, oh, that's at the bottom, non-speaking autistic people. That's also a limitation. We didn't have much response from non-speaking autistic people. And then our online survey was the majority of filled out by females. The majority of respondents were females than males, and that's not similar to current diagnostic distributions. But it is interesting to note that with other adult studies, it tends to be mostly females responding. So what do we need to do in the future research? Making sure that we have racial and ethnic diverse respondents, non-binary autistic adults, otherwise intersectionality. And that's just a big multi-syllabic word for describing when someone is in two communities at once. So an autistic person who is also, for example, racially or ethnically diverse, who also has ADHD, for example. So it's two or more communities. What about those individuals who don't have the ability to consent to participate on their own in research? So we have to get consent. There is a way to do that. We can get what is known as assent, which means getting the consent from that person's parents. So that might be you, for example, or their guardian, and then moving on to the individual. And do they assent to work with us? And then, as I mentioned before, non-speaking autistic individuals. So what is happening? Where does the work continue? It continues with this PCORI effectiveness research study, $9.1 million grant, 5-year grant, where our goal is to compare two different approaches to suicide prevention tailored for autistic youth. And in brief, these two approaches, they're actually the same approach. But what we did is onto the second approach, or approach B, we tacked on some follow-up procedures. And so essentially, does it work better to follow up? Which approach is results in better outcomes for autistic youth and better satisfaction. And suicide prevention is important to focus on because suicide is unfortunately one of the leading causes of death in autistic individuals. So in our next steps, in our current research, we've developed a decision-making process, a three-step process that begins with discussing options as a team. So we can think of that team as the community council of autistic individuals. We discuss these options. So maybe what is the lower age limit that we should have in involving respondents in our research? Should it be 12, 13, 14, or 15, or whatever they may happen to be? We come up with a number of ages. Do we all agree to proceed? Can we finalize a decision? Can we all decide on a specific age? If we can, then we move on. If we don't, then we have to return to step one. So let's take a look at this in detail. So step one, we obtain input and clarify all possible options. And we communicate in the best way that that individual communicates. And there we are, we have our age options, 11 through 14 as the earliest, or I should say the youngest people we should have involved in our study. So we go to step two. What are those options? Maybe we've narrowed it down to two ages, 13 and 14, and now we're going to vote via Google Forms. And in our step two, it's important to recognize that there are four options that a person can choose. Oh, I don't care, it doesn't matter, 13 or 14, no big deal. Two, yeah, I like this option, specifically 14. I'd like to go with that. I don't prefer this, but it's okay if it continues. And then there's 4, I don't prefer it, and I'm uncomfortable moving forward with this choice. If we get a 4, and what that means, as we see here, is that we need to talk to that individual. So we have a community council of, say, 15 people, and one person says, I'm just not comfortable with this choice. I'm not comfortable with moving forward. And in contrast to what usually happens where we say, well, 14 voted yes, you voted no, we're going with majority rule, so we're just forging ahead. Instead, what we do is we discuss with that individual, number 4, what is it, why are you so uncomfortable with number 4? Maybe it's something that we can work out through individual discussion. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe there was more information that person needed, or whatever it was, and then we can carry on. If that person says no, then we go back to the beginning and we start again. And that way everybody feels heard, because we want everybody authentically involved in our research. The challenge is that it tends to take more time to come up with decisions. However, our decisions, we feel, are much more solid and representative of our community council, who represents the autistic community. So step 3, we finalize that decision. Let's say that person agrees, they didn't realize one thing or other, they say, okay. We review these forms, share the results, and as mentioned, we have individual conversations if it's needed. And again, this is the summary of the steps. Discuss options as a team. Is it okay for all of us to proceed? Are we going to choose? Can we come to a decision that we all agree on? Not a majority, but all. And if so, can we proceed, or do we need to go back to step one? And as we look at the limitations and risks, of this research, we're still focusing on speaking autistic adults. So we need to involve non-speaking autistic adults. We didn't differentiate between the support given between different age groups. We need to work better on including unrepresented groups. And it's always possible that we have an overrepresentation of the loudest speakers, the proverbial squeaky wheel getting the grease. And what are the risks? There's always risks to being involved in research for the participants. And some of them might include recalling memories of past traumas or challenging events, reigniting traumatic memories. There's always as much as we try, there's always possible that inadvertently some sensitive or confidential information could be exposed to the public. We do our best to keep that from happening. It hasn't happened yet, but we also hear about hackers accessing tens or hundreds or even millions of passwords and sensitive information getting into computers that they shouldn't be getting into. And also making sure that we understand that the results are facts, or misattribution of results by autistic people and those supporting these individuals as fact as opposed to suggestion. So we go back to those 4 A's of autism: awareness, acceptance, appreciation, and action. And back to the question, what actions are you going to take? What efforts are you going to take to climb those steps of awareness, acceptance, and appreciation of autistic individuals, be it involved in research, be it involved in achieving success in employment, residential living, education, involvement in the community, or whatever areas of success that the autistic person is seeking. And then finally, here are some publications resulting from our work that you see here. There's more and more of them being produced all the time. This is what we have for now. And I want to thank you all for your participation and your and the efforts that you put into in making fulfilling and productive lives for autistic individuals the rule rather than the exception, whether that's through supporting the individual through their daily lives, through communication, or whatever that challenge may be, so that that person can achieve success. And I think now is a great time for questions.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
You're welcome.
Yeah, what a valuable session. Really interesting. I really appreciate the focus on listening with autistic people, not just about them, and the reminder that that lived experience matters so much in shaping the support and research that's so important. And the insight you shared as well around mental health priorities, especially with autistic adults, it's quite eye-opening, especially how little research goes into funding, or little research goes into funding towards adult outcomes, and how often we see autistic voices left out of decisions that directly affect them. So yeah, so thank you for highlighting that.
No, my pleasure.
Great presentation. So we've got a bit of time for a couple of questions. So my first one, if how can parents help make sure that their child's voice is included in decisions about their healthcare or support, especially if the child is nonverbal?
Well, it's important to use the best means of communication for that child, means of communication that best fits.
Hmm.
And we are a talking society, which means verbal communication, spoken communication, but that's not always available for autistic individuals. So that means finding a reliable means of communication for that person. It might be pointing at pictures, PEX pictures on an iPad, using a communication board with physical pictures and using Velcro to attach them. It might be through
Hmm.
sign language, it might be through typing. And for those individuals who have not acquired a reliable means of communication yet, it really takes observation in getting to know your child, your student, or whomever you're supporting.
Yeah.
And, and in that way, um, you can learn more about healthcare preferences and challenges for those individuals.
Yeah, and understanding their real needs, right, and meeting them where they're at that time, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if parents want to get more involved in autism research or advocacy, have you got any suggestions of where they might be able to start?
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of opportunities. One is you're always free to contact me
Hmm.
at sshore@adelphi.edu. And if you forget that or you didn't catch it, you look me up, Stephen Shore Autism on Google, and you'll find a way to contact me. There's organizations involved in research, such as International Society for Autism Research, and we
Hmm.
hold an annual conference focused on, well, it's in the name, research.
Yeah.
And what is encouraging about this organization is that increasing numbers of autistic people are involved. We're doing our own research and
Yeah,
presenting
fantastic.
it.
Which is how it should be, right?
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the most important thing. Um, and parents might find sometimes that doctors or health professionals that they go to don't quite understand their child's needs. What would you think they could do there if they're not really feeling understood about their child?
Well, often it's up to parents. It shouldn't have to be, but it is. It's
Hmm.
often up to parents to educate the person who's providing for the child. It's the child's providers. It might be educational, so in the school system, it might be some sort of therapist, uh, clinician, or it might be a doctor.
Hmm.
And providing this information with will be helpful for my son or daughter if you're able to do this, whatever that is. This is, it might be using pictures, developing a picture schedule. And in fact, we've developed a picture schedule for our child, and we're happy to share it with you.
Fantastic. And they can find that by going to your site.
Yeah, my site.
Yeah,
More information is available at drstephenshore.com.
perfect. And just lastly, what's one thing that you wish more researchers or health professionals understood about the autistic community, and how can parents help spread that message?
Well, I think what's is so important to keep in mind is the wide diversity that we find within the autism spectrum. It's possible that the diversity within autism is greater than the diversity outside of autism. And while we are still bound by common characteristics of, and I like to use the word differences,
Mhm.
differences in communication, social interaction, the
Mhm.
intensity of our focused interests, sensory differences. Um, when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so true. Well, that's all we've got time for, Stephen. But thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you so much
Oh,
for
my
being
pleasure.
part of our summit. I'm sure everyone watching will find your presentation valuable and take a lot away from it. Yeah, thank you so much for being part of it, and hopefully we can join us again in the future.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
No worries. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.